Good job.
Hello, hello, everyone. Happy Friday. Happy last day at Mainnet. I can't believe how fast this week has gone. So we're here today to talk about what it's like to be a Web3 fan at a Web2 giant. I'm joined by a bunch of amazing panelists who work in the space. And let's just start off by sort of going down the line here. I'll start with you. What is Web3? OK, we're going to get really basic. What is Web3, and how does your job connect to Web3?
Yeah, so hi, everyone. Nice to meet you. My name is Rich. I run our Web3 strategy for Google Cloud. We're really forcing you to get right into it. I feel like people are still waking up. But when we think about Web3, it's really about this ethos around decentralization, censorship-resistant protocols for not just moving information, but moving information in value. And I think this ties into kind of the very common meme where you have Web 1 is read, Web 2 is read write, and then Web 3 is read write own. But that ownership component really can only exist if you've got those elements of censorship resistance and decentralization. So that's how we think about Web 3 at Google Cloud. And thanks for having us here today.
Awesome. So my name is Ty Swartz. I'm a product manager at Instagram within our Creator Blockchain Experiences team. So we just launched the ability to connect your wallet and display your NFTs as NFTs. And we really look at Web3 as the ability for a creator to control supply. This is something in the digital space which really hasn't been possible before. Things that are digital tend to be able to be copied and pasted for an unlimited amount. And so because you have this database that's decentralized, that everyone can look at as sort of a source of truth, it allows for whole new applications and use cases to be built across multiple platforms where a creator gets to define the supply. And that leads to different powers of economics for the different creators that are working in this space. So that's where we look at this as a way to empower creators to control their financial futures for the stuff that they create on our platforms.
Hi, everyone. My name is Vanessa Grellet. I'll bring in the investor perspective here. I run a Web3 early stage investment fund, and it's backed by the LVMH family. When I think about Web3, I'm really looking at open source platforms that are available to everyone to build and create incredible censorship-resistant apps and platforms. So I see a future where you have all these, great platforms with great ecosystems, building primitives, upon which the investors and the users and the consumers are kind of like the same person, which is very different from the business models that we see right now. So that's what I find very exciting. And getting those business models right is, we're just at the start of it. And so I think the future is looking bright for Web3.
That's great. So bringing up the rear here, excellent comments, not much to add. The 4 words that I actually like to use to describe the phenomenon in Web3, aside from ownership, which is a really important aspect of this, the ability to define digital uniqueness on a global domain is not something we've had in technology before. And so that has huge technical ramifications for business models, how we think about building technology applications to serve creators and consumers. And it's just a huge opportunity for the entire internet ecosystem. So very exciting time ahead.
And Yorke, as someone who works at Microsoft, do you feel like there are Web 2 values and Web 3 values? Do you feel like there is any kind of difference between those two things? And what is Web 3 values to you?
I mean, it's a great question. So, the idea that consumers should own their data and have privacy over their data as a core principle.
We couldn't tell with your privacy hat and privacy shirt.
I only found 2 vendors in the expo who had actual privacy swag, or else I would be wearing more. It is really important. I mean, privacy is all about encryption. Encryption is a technology that's developed by developers, right? This concept of of ownership and identity is just it's so core, and from a Microsoft perspective, it's a large company with many divisions, including GitHub, and we can talk about that, LinkedIn, Office products, email products, cloud products, right? There's a lot going on in a company like Microsoft, not to mention Microsoft Research as well, where there's wonderful core research going on in like zero-knowledge proofs, for example, as well as consensus protocols. And then lastly, and not to forget, our gaming business, which is a huge business as well, and very interesting opportunities. So.
Yeah, and to just go off of that, I mean, I know Microsoft acquired GitHub, and I also know that recently GitHub has decided to allow Tornado Cash back on its platform. Can you speak a bit more about that and what your thoughts are on that?
Yeah, so I mean, GitHub is obviously a huge developer tooling platform. GitHub does not study all of the protocols that exist on it. So if a sanction regulatory institution says something that concerns an institution like GitHub, which is a division of Microsoft, the gut reaction is going to be, OK, we have to comply. And then you take a step back and you go and study and you learn what is this thing. And obviously, OFAC took a step back, right, as well in that time period. And so, we basically reestablished all of the GitHub repos and all the developer repos, which is awesome, right? I'm so glad to see that. So.
Right, and Richard, you're at Google, and I know Google has, I think, 1.5 billion in various crypto investments. Can you speak to what Google's stance is on crypto and Web3 and how that integrates into the rest of Google's business more broadly? Yeah,
so Google's a really big place. The investment stat that you're talking about, that's our venture arms, and actually that's been happening since 2017. I mean, the way that we think about it just really ties back into that question around, like, is there a difference between the Web2, Web3 values point? I think we fundamentally believe that those values that we're all kind of like are coming to the front and center in the discussion around decentralization, the Tornado Cash issue. These are things that we've always been kind of trying to champion at Google generally, right? I think like if you go back and you look at like MIT Media Lab, Nicholas Negroponte, like some of the quotes in those books talking about decentralization back in the 90s. The idea that it would remove walled gardens, remove barriers, democratize information. And so basically what we have now is we have blockchain technology, we have distributed ledgers, we have the ability to tokenize assets and have a stored center of truth, right, or source of truth. And so once you start thinking about that, democratization of information becomes democratization of value. And it allows and empowers content creators in a way that I think when people were thinking about the early days of the internet, certainly when Google was getting started out, if they could have done that, I think they would. So the goal really for us is about, particularly on the enterprise side, is how do we think about making it easier for companies who want to play in this space, fulfill the fundamental early promises of the internet. And so, if you were to draw those Venn diagrams, from our point of view, I think there's a lot of overlap.
Right, and what do you guys make of Jack Dorsey talking about Web 5 and sort of poking fun at Web 3 and this idea of this next version of the internet?
I think what he's really trying to say, and I can't tell, it could be a very elaborate troll. It's maybe a subtle, nuanced thought. I'm sure you guys see this at Instagram a lot, but like he's kind of, I think, driving at this point, which is there has been a lot of chatter at a very superficial level around like the purity tests. Like any type of centralization is a problem. And it just kind of makes the conversation really mushy. I think it really hides the ball on why we think this is super important. So I think what he's really saying is, look, you can't decentralize everything. Right, at Google Cloud, like we've run 19 undersea cables. I don't know what that looks like with a DAO. I don't know really how you do that effectively. That's not to say we couldn't do that in the future, and it's certainly noble to strive for that goal. But I think what Jack is trying to create is a little bit more nuance into the conversation between the idea that like there can only be Web 2 versus Web 3 as opposed to Web 2 and Web 3, which is him doing the math and getting to 5. But
Right.
I don't know. That's our view. Ty, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts from the Instagram
I mean,
perspective.
I think probably everybody at this group then all of a sudden got a ping from a very senior leader in the company being like, hey, what is this Web 5 thing? And I had to go spend a serious amount of time trying to understand, is this actually a thing? But I think he does have valid complaints, and there are things that we should always look when we're building in a technology space. Hey, are we funding this from equitable sources that are, from more of the, I guess, distributed way that we would want to think about the Web3 space, or is this a very small group of VCs that are heavily involved? And those are things that, are good call-outs, and we should all be mindful of things that we can do better to be in this space. But I think the fundamental technology, right, that is sitting at the core, I think shows a lot of promise, right? What people are building right now might not actually be what builds the new future, right? There's probably going to be a lot of failures, a lot of new creation, and then eventually the space will find where the right product market fit is. And we just need to be mindful of where we have gaps, where we can improve, and continue to go from there.
Yeah, just add to that, I think Jack Dorsey's obviously a huge decentralization fan, and it's useful to have those voices in the market. I think that he's also a huge decentralized identity and verifiable claim fan, which has implications around sort of the application stack a little bit as well. But I think to your point, Rich, like, there's a reason why we build highly scalable services in a cloud, right? Being a cloud vendor, right? Like, it is also self-fulfilling, but like you can't build scalable Instagram applications, as an example, without something like cloud. And so the application stack certainly has to be responsible to the principles of decentralization and ownership of content and consumer ownership of their identity. But the actual stack to scale how we deliver content is going to require cloud, right? And what I'd love to see in the crypto space is that we actually work together with the 3 major cloud vendors and ensure that there's not density on one cloud versus the other, because that will actually help with decentralization, right?
Just to piggyback off of that, like this is where I think you can get that kind of scale without necessarily creating those walled gardens, right? So I mean, I'm going to say there is a difference between us and the other clouds in the sense that, think about Kubernetes, right? The Kubernetes engine is an open source containerization engine that was designed by Google, and then we created so that you don't have to run everything on Google Cloud in order to take advantage of the Kubernetes engine. So think about a world in which everyone here, if you're with a startup or if you've even played with blockchain data, you're familiar with nodes, and you run nodes, and at some point in time you have to eeny, meeny, miny, mo your cloud provider. A lot of time that's based on inertia, you're kind of locked in. But wouldn't it be very interesting if you take that Kubernetes concept, right? The idea that you could just deploy a compute container on some cloud of any choice, and you extrapolated that out into the node context. So it's not just I hit Amazon's page or GCP's page and I'm stuck with them. But what if I could take that and move anywhere? And I think that's really important, because then you get to leverage the scale and the reliability of a large centralized cloud, but you're not really stuck in that walled garden. And in fact, that's exactly I think where the space needs to go, is that the centralization points, optimal centralization for building data centers and laying undersea cables and low latency, that's great. But the ability to deploy the compute container in an open source standard and be able to vote with your feet and drive decentralization, I think that's absolutely where the conversation needs to go. And so we love seeing more of that. We want to see more of that from the other clouds as well.
And by the way, the founder of Kubernetes works for Microsoft now, just in case you didn't know that. We're huge fans of Kubernetes. In fact, a lot of the application stacks that we run are Kubernetes. So.
And speaking of decentralized internet and Web3, what are your thoughts on things like the ENS, Ethereum name service, and what they're trying to do with names that are connected to your wallet address, and then having these sorts of different hosting scenarios? Anyone can jump in on thoughts on this.
Well, I think you're probably going to have an opinion on this, but starting from the basics, right? Like ENS is a massive opportunity in the DNS space to decentralize DNS, right? And so that's important, right? First off, and just one of these sort of core things that we can actually do. I think when you start to connect pseudonymous addresses with things that identify people, then we have to start to be careful, right? You know, I'm sure you have an opinion on that too.
There's a tension. Hear me?
Oh, it's back.
I think
Between privacy and, you know, the idea that you can interact with a wallet. Does it work?
I think
it's going in and out, but I think
Yeah,
it's,
stop touching it. There you go.
That you can interact with a wallet, be anonymous or pseudo-anonymous, and then the idea that you want to be represented on the internet, and you want to have a persona, and you want to have an identity, and that you can own the information that's related to that identity. And I think we're at an early stage where people don't really know how to behave with that and don't understand the risks. And there are risks. You know, wallets get attacked all the time. Get drained, and there are some issues around that. So I think we're at a level of maturity where, you know, you're going to have people who are going to end up with these addresses very public. You know, people can send you Tornado Cash, you know, tokens or digital assets.
Which is okay now.
And then your address is blocked. So there are a lot of issues around that, and I don't think we have figured out, you know, what does the wallet represent, and how you as an individual are positioned against that wallet. When you're in the developer space, it's totally fine. Everyone understands, everyone has a lot of wallets, people know how to make sure that, you know, you're not doxxed. But when you get into the consumer layer, I think it poses a lot of issues, and we see a lot of Web2 companies who basically just want to monetize the wallet like in the traditional Web2 space. So it kind of defies the purpose of Web3. So I think we're at an interesting time when people are trying to figure out business models, but the fallback option is the Web2 monetization of information of the individuals. And as a general reminder, the Web3 movement is a reaction against that. So we'll see how it pays out in the coming months.
Right, and I think, you know, we are seeing a lot of, obviously, Web2 companies doing Web3 things, and I wonder how much that will shape the philosophy going forward. But Ty, I would love to know your thoughts on, let's talk, you know, things like NFTs, Metaverse, Meta, you know, obviously. And I know that Meta is building in this Metaverse, focusing on VR, doing a lot of different things. We're seeing Instagram trying to roll out NFTs. I know that's, you know, I would love to know when that's coming out for everybody.
Me too.
And I also would love to know your thoughts on Mark Zuckerberg when he released this screenshot of himself. You know, it was a selfie in front of the Eiffel Tower. I'm sure everybody here saw it. There was some sort of lashback online and criticism about that. What do you make of that? And what are your thoughts on both the criticism and, you know, where Meta's going with its products in the metaverse?
So within the NFT space, I think we became extraordinarily interested when we realized that this is a place that artists that are on our platform, like the photographers, the digital artists that make a living and connect with their fans on our platform, are actually able to take the art and actually be able to monetize it in a way that like is ongoing and continuous, where they get to define the supply that they're able to sort of like set around the you know, the exchange between the demand and supply. So they can set price, which is something that was only given to platforms before. And so for that angle of like empowerment, we viewed this as absolutely a direction that we wanted to lean into, that we wanted to really make sure that the artists that are on our platform are given those sort of capabilities to represent this the way that they want to. And so that's been our first rollout. So we started off in May, where we rolled this out to a small group of artists just to test it out, make sure that the pipes were actually working. Then we rolled it out to the rest of the United States, and now we're worldwide with the exception of Europe today. And so if you have an Instagram account, you can connect your wallet. We support, I think, like 5 wallets at this point, and are going to continue to support multiple blockchains, multiple wallets, and be agnostic to sort of bring the content that you want to work on, where you want to work on it, to our platform. There's a lot of different definitions that as we sort of think through what the metaverse is. One of the ways that we're thinking about it is that we're going to exist in this world where there's not a single platform, that everything sort of is able to bleed together. And what the blockchain enables is that shared database layer where we can all look back down and build on top of for those use cases. And so where we're trying to figure out as we go forward is what are those experiences where data and like a user's data is not just tied to a single application, but exists in a public layer where I can now interact as who I am and who I want to represent myself across multiple platforms. And what is that going to mean? And one of the ways that we're sort of exploring, as well as in the virtual reality space, this is a space we think is going to be really interesting and going to be continuing to grow, and is frankly a lot of fun, is how does that actually fit into the VR versus classic desktop versus mobile type experiences versus in real life. And all of these places that you're in, the ways that you engage, need to find a way to converge across a singular identity. But then we get into challenges around privacy. And so this is going to be something we're going to be continuously working with. And the beauty of Web3 is we're not doing it alone, right? Like this is not something where we only have secret meetings within Meta. This is a place where we are out in the field meeting with the other platforms that are building, because that's the future that Web3 enables. It's no longer siloed organizations. It only works if we actually reach out and work together. And so that's where this is going to be really fun.
Yeah, and so the metaverse that Meta's building, is it going to involve crypto? Do you see are there going to be crypto integrations, or is it going to be sort of straying away from that for?
So the current platform that's on Horizon, I think, is the application. It's extraordinarily small, right? It's still in its early stages, and so at this point, they're going to be continuously exploring crypto, but I don't think they're committed that that's where they want to go right out of the gate. But if our applications across the space support that, that might be something that they add in the future.
I think, realistically, right, like, if you're sitting on 2.5 billion users in a walled garden, it's going to be hard to change that business model, right? So for sure, right? But I think if we think about the principles of Web3, that the metaverse with Web3 is actually what we want to see in the metaverse, right? Because it implicates consumer-owned identity. It implicates all various forms of payments. It implicates creator spaces, right, where I can choose what my avatar looks like. I can purchase avatar gear from artists or brands and own it, right, and take it with me, whether I'm running in the metaverse, right, or whether I'm running in Decentraland or Roblox or Sandbox or, whoever's version of the metaverse, right? And I think that's also what brands, I think, have aped into. They're very, consumer product goods focused, which implies ownership by consumers. And you shouldn't have to take off your Nike backpack to cross the street from Macy's in Herald Square, New York, to H&M, right? And that's where we are today in these closed metaverses.
Right, and Vanessa, I would love to switch gears for our last couple minutes here and talk about the investment side of things and the VC side of things. I would love to know the differences for you, and what do you look for in a Web3 founder compared to a Web2 founder, and how do you think that space is different from the traditional tech space?
That's interesting. I think from a founder's perspective, we're looking for the same traits, actually. People who are passionate, who have the ability to execute, who both see the big picture, but are also able to really inspire teams, bring along clients and investors with them in that journey. So I think that's kind of the same, especially at this stage of where we are in the cycle. And when you get into more applications, consumer apps, et cetera, where there's more similarities to Web2. I think the other models where you have decentralized platforms, I think the traits that we look at is this ability to lead in a way that is not top-down. And I think that's actually a trait of great leaders also in Web2 or in general, right? You're able to have people follow you, you inspire them, and you empower them. And so I think that's what we look towards these young entrepreneurs. So now it's interesting, we have second-time founders, third-time founders in Web3. We still have very young entrepreneurs, so we're pretty hands-on as investors, really trying to guide them. But I would say these principles of decentralization don't really impact what we're looking for. We're really looking for leaders who are able to create communities and bringing in and create great products too.
And how has the bear market changed your strategy in this space?
So it hasn't changed our strategy. We invest very early, so we're pre-seed, seed, Series A. So that market has not been totally impacted yet. Valuations have come down, which is something we are not unhappy about. And we see a shift with other types of VCs coming in, whether it's Web2 VCs who are opening pockets for Web3, who are more focused on business models rather than the sort of the big vision from the get-go. So we see a lot more attention to metrics, to revenue. Cash is king right now, and I think we've invested in great founders who know that this bear market is a great opportunity to build and to be heads down. So we're pretty excited.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for hanging out with us. Thank you guys for coming up and chatting with us. We're just, bridging the gap between Web 2 and Web 3, as they say. So thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.